Hi, and welcome to Eyes Wide Open, a daily short podcast on the topic of Mashiach and the upcoming redemption, dedicated in memory of Rabbi Tzvi ben Alexander HaKohen Kogan Hashem Yinkein Domi. In the last episode, we talked about how the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic philosophy, one Rosh Hashanah, encountered Mashiach, and Mashiach gave him a directive, a mission, to teach Hasidic philosophy everywhere, and through that prepare for the coming of Mashiach. And we ended with the question, why? Why specifically Hasidic philosophy? And to answer this question, we have to share a story. And the story is that the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, so the lineage goes is that the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of Hasidic philosophy. His successor was Rabbi Dov Ber Mezrich, the Maggid of Mezrich, who was a second leader of all of Hasidic philosophy, of all Hasidim. After the Maggid passed away, his students gathered together, and at that point, Hasidic philosophy had really spread. And it was agreed that there wouldn't be one Rebbe of all Hasidim. That wouldn't be effective at all. Instead, each student would spread out into a different area and teach Hasidus as they understood it in the area there was. And one of those students was Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, known as Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad philosophy. And he went to Lithuania and the Yozna, taught there Chabad Hasidus philosophy. So, at a certain point, the Alter Rebbe there was a libel created about the Alter Rebbe that he was planning a rebellion, a revolution against the Tsarist government, and they imprisoned him. During that imprisonment, his teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich, and his teacher's teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, neither of whom were alive anymore, visited him in a spiritual sense. And the Alter Rebbe asked them, I understand that everything that happens down here is a result of something happening in heaven. If I am sentenced in prison down here in Russia, it's because there's a complaint about my actions, there's a complaint about what I'm doing happening in heaven. What is going on in heaven? What are they upset about? And they answered that they're upset that you're teaching Hasidus too much. You're explaining it too much. And the Alter Rebbe said, okay, so should I stop? And they said, no, on the contrary, you should expand even more. You should teach even more. And when he was freed on the 19th of Kislev, which is actually coming up in a few days, the Alter Rebbe not just continued teaching Hasidus, but a far greater scale than he had done so before. The question, however, is that a few years or a few decades earlier than this, when the Alter Rebbe was a student by his teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich, one day the Maggid of Mezrich got very sick. And they investigated, and they discovered that there was a holy man, a righteous tzaddik, a righteous person, who was upset with the Maggid of Mezrich, and that his being upset with the Maggid had made him very sick. So the Alter Rebbe went to go speak to this righteous individual, to ask him and to plead with him to understand what he was upset about, and hopefully to calm him down so that the Maggid could recover. So he went and met with him, and the righteous individual told him that he had been walking in the street one day, and the students of the Maggid of Mezrich had printed on pieces of paper and pamphlets teachings of Hasidic philosophy to give out to different people. And when you give out lots of pamphlets or something, some of them end up on the ground and they end up getting trodden upon. And this righteous person saw there the teachings of Chassidus, which is the heart of Torah, the most beautiful parts of Torah, lying on the ground, being trodden on people, and he was shocked, he was horrified. How could this be allowed to happen? And he thought to himself, this is directly happening because the teachings of Chassidus are being taught to such a broad scale. Had they not been taught to such a broad scale, they wouldn't be taught. This wouldn't have happened. And so he was upset, and that's what caused the Maggid to be sick. So the Alter Rebbe, he told this to the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman, hearing this, responded, I want to give you a metaphor. You have a king who has one son, his crown prince, and the crown prince gets very sick. And they call in every single doctor they can think of. No one can come up with a cure. And so they bring in one doctor. The doctor says he has an idea. He says it's very risky. He doesn't know if it will work. Between you and me, he doesn't even know if he would recommend it. And the king says, what is it? And the doctor says, in the king's crown, in the very center of the king's crown is a jewel, the most prized jewel of the entire country that sits in the heart of the king's crown. He says, I believe if you take that jewel and you crush it up and you grind it into dust and then turn it into liquid, if you can get it past the prince's lips, which right now are closed, and if you get the comatose prince to maybe swallow at least some of this liquid, there's a chance that it might revive him. But there's a lot of maybes over here. The king says, I don't care. The whole point of this crown, the whole point of this jewel is that I have a successor. It's for my son. Without my son, what's the point? I'll risk anything to possibly revive him. So the Alter Rebbe says to this righteous person, in a similar sense, Chassidus exists to revive the Jewish people, to bring life to the Jewish people, emotional life, spiritual life. It's true that when you teach anything at scale, some of it gets lost. Some of it might even end up on the ground and get it trodden upon. But what's the point of keeping it hidden if the purpose of it, which is to save the Jewish people, isn't being fulfilled? Isn't anything worth the chance to maybe save one more Jew? And when the righteous person heard this, he agreed, and he took back his complaint against the Maggid, and the Maggid recovered. So the Rebbe asks a very interesting question. If the Alter Rebbe himself, when he was a young man, encountered a scenario where his teacher encountered a spiritual complaint against him for teaching Chassidus at scale, and he himself answered it, that it was appropriate to teach Chassidus at scale no matter the cost, because by teaching Chassidus at scale, you have the possibility of saving another Jew, then how is it, just a few short decades later, that the same person, the Alter Rebbe, is now in prison over the same complaint, teaching Chassidus at scale, and he who answered it the first time has no idea what to respond. He turns to his teachers and says, should I stop? It seems to be history repeating itself. Why is the same complaint coming up at a spiritual level all over again? And the Rebbe answers that Chassidus has two ideas to it, two things that it accomplishes. One, it revives the heart of a Jew. It gives inspiration, it gives life to another Jew. But to accomplish that, you don't need to teach a lot of Chassidus. You just need to teach a few short insights, something short, something sweet, the conclusion, a really nice 1 or 2 liner that can really inspire someone. That's what the Baal Shem Tov taught. That's what the Maggid taught. Short, insightful Hasidic teachings. That's not what the Alter Rebbe taught, and that's definitely not what the Rebbes who succeeded the Alter Rebbe, the next Rebbes, the leaders of Chabad, taught. They taught Hasidus at length, hours and hours of Hasidic philosophy, expounded upon, explaining it back and forth. Not all of it was just inspirational takeaways. A lot of it was the depth and the intellectual parts of Hasidic philosophy. And now was the question, why was it appropriate to be teaching that? That's no longer inspiring people. People are inspired. What's the need to teach all that depth of the heart of Torah, which is so precious, so pure, at scale? And the answer to that is because Hasidic philosophy is a taste of the Torah of Moshiach will teach us. The reason why Chassidus was revealed only in the last few centuries of Jewish history is because of two reasons. The first reason is because the Jewish people needed it, and that was an answer to the first way of teaching Chassidus, short 1 or 2 liners. That we needed those short 1 or 2 liners to bring life back to Jewish people. But the second reason is because we're so close to Mashiach's coming that we now are ready to begin preparing for the Torah Mashiach will teach us by learning at least an appetizer of that Torah. And that is what Chassidus teaches, an appetizer, a foretaste of Mashiach's Torah. So as I mentioned in the last episode, when we learn about the new Torah that Mashiach will teach, it isn't just a theoretical concept, but something very practical, that we have today a foretaste, an appetizer of the teachings that Mashiach will teach us. And when we learn the teachings of Chassidus, we prepare ourselves for the Torah of Moshiach, and that is why when we learn the teachings of Chassidus, especially at length, especially with depth, we prepare so perfectly for the Torah of Moshiach.